The Man in the Brown Suit by Agatha Christie. Chapter XXV. I came to myself slowly and painfully. I was conscious of an aching head and a shooting pain down my left arm when I tried to move, and everything seemed dreamlike and unreal. Nightmare visions floated before me. I felt myself falling again. Once Harry Rayburn's face seemed to come to me out of the mist. Almost I imagined it real. Then it floated away again, mocking me. Once, I remember, someone put a cup to my lips and I drank. A black face grinned into mine, a devil's face, I thought it, and screamed out. Then dreams again, long troubled dreams in which I vainly sought Harry Rayburn to warn him, what of? I did not know myself. But there was some danger, some great danger, and I alone could save him. Then darkness again, merciful darkness, and real sleep. I woke at last myself again. The long nightmare was over. I remembered perfectly everything that had happened, my hurried flight from the hotel to meet Harry, the man in the shadows, and that last terrible moment of falling. By some miracle or other, I had not been killed. I was bruised and aching and very weak, but I was alive. But where was I? Moving my head with difficulty, I looked round me. I was in a small room with rough wooden walls. On them were hung skins of animals and various tusks of ivory. I was lying on a kind of rough couch, also covered with skins, and my left arm was bandaged up and felt stiff and uncomfortable. At first I thought I was alone, and then I saw a man's figure sitting between me and the light, his head turned toward the window. He was so still that he might have been carved out of wood. Something in the close-cropped black head was familiar to me, but I did not dare to let my imagination run astray. Suddenly he turned, and I caught my breath. It was Harry Rayburn. Harry Rayburn in the flesh. He rose and came over to me. Feeling better, he said a trifle awkwardly. I could not answer. The tears were running down my face. I was weak still, but I held his hand in both of mine. If only I could die like this, whilst he stood there looking down on me with that new look in his eyes. Don't cry, Anne. Please don't cry. You're safe now. No one shall hurt you. He went and fetched a cup and brought it to me. Drink some of this milk. I drank obediently. He went on talking in a low coaxing tone such as he might have used to a child. Don't ask any more questions now. Go to sleep again. You'll be stronger by and by. I'll go away if you like. No, I said urgently. No, no. Then I'll stay. He brought a small stool over beside me and sat there. He laid his hand over mine, and, soothed and comforted, I dropped off to sleep once more. It must have been evening then, but when I woke again the sun was high in the heavens. I was alone in the hut, but as I stirred an old native woman came running in. She was hideous as sin, but she grinned at me encouragingly. She brought me water in a basin and helped me wash my face and hands. Then she brought me a large bowl of soup, and I finished it every drop. I asked her several questions, but she only grinned and nodded and chattered away in a guttural language, so I gathered she knew no English. Suddenly she stood up and drew back respectfully as Harry Rayburn entered. He gave her a nod of dismissal and she went out leaving us alone. He smiled at me. Really better today? Yes, indeed, but very bewildered still. Where am I? You're on a small island on the Zambesi about 4 miles up from the falls. Do my friends know I'm here? He shook his head. I must send word to them. That is as you like, of course, But if I were you, I should wait until you are a little stronger. Why? He did not answer immediately, so I went on. How long have I been here? His answer amazed me. Nearly a month. Oh, I cried. I must send word to Suzanne. She'll be terribly anxious. Who is Suzanne? Mrs. Blair. I was with her and Sir Eustace and Colonel Reyes at the hotel, but you knew that surely. He shook his head. I know nothing, except that I found you, caught in the fork of a tree, unconscious and with a badly wrenched arm. Where was the tree? Overhanging the ravine. But for your clothes catching on the branches, you would infallibly have been dashed to pieces. I shuddered. Then a thought struck me. You say you didn't know I was there. What about the note then? What note? The note you sent me, asking me to meet you in the clearing. He stared at me. I sent no note. I felt myself flushing up to the roots of my hair. Fortunately, he did not seem to notice. How did you come to be on the spot in such a marvelous manner? I asked in as nonchalant a manner as I could assume. And what are you doing in this part of the world, anyway? I live here, he said simply. On this island? Yes, I came here after the war. Sometimes I take parties from the hotel out in my boat, but it costs me very little to live, and mostly I do as I please. You live here all alone. I am not pining for society, I assure you, he replied coldly. I am sorry to have inflicted mine upon you, I retorted, but I seem to have had very little to say in the matter. To my surprise, his eyes twinkled a little. None whatever. I slung you across my shoulders like a sack of coal and carried you to my boat. Quite like a primitive man of the Stone Age. But for a different reason, I put in. He flushed this time, a deep burning blush. The tan of his face was suffused. But you haven't told me how you came to be wandering about so conveniently for me. I said hastily, to cover his confusion. I couldn't sleep. I was restless, disturbed, had the feeling something was going to happen. In the end, I took the boat and came ashore and tramped down towards the falls. I was just at the head of the palm gully when I heard you scream. Why didn't you get help from the hotel instead of carting me all the way here? I asked. He flushed again. I suppose it seems an unpardonable liberty to you, but I don't think that even now you realize your danger. You think I should have informed your friends? Pretty friends who allowed you to be decoyed out to death. No, I swore to myself that I'd take better care of you than anyone else could. Not a soul comes to this island. I got old Batani, whom I cured of a fever once, to come and look after you. She's loyal. She'll never say a word. I could keep you here for months and no one would ever know. I could keep you here for months and no one would ever know. How some words please one. You did quite right, I said quietly. And I shall not send word to anyone. A day or so more anxiety doesn't make much difference. It's not as though they were my own people. They're only acquaintances really, even Suzanne. And whoever wrote that note must have known a great deal. It was not the work of an outsider. I managed to mention the note this time without blushing at all. If you would be guided by me, he said, hesitating. I don't expect I shall be, I answered candidly. But there's no harm in hearing. Do you always do what you like, Miss Bedingfeld? Usually, I replied cautiously. To anyone else, I would have said always. I pity your husband, he said unexpectedly. You needn't, I retorted. I shouldn't dream of marrying anyone unless I was madly in love with them. And of course, there is really nothing a woman enjoys so much as doing all the things she doesn't like for the sake of someone she does like. And the more self willed she is, the more she likes it. I'm afraid I disagree with you. The boot is on the other leg as a rule. He spoke with a slight sneer. Exactly, I cried eagerly. And that's why there are so many unhappy marriages. It's all the fault of the men. Either they give way to their women, and then the women despise them, or else they are utterly selfish, insist on their own way, and never say, thank you. Successful husbands make their wives do just what they want, and then make a frightful fuss of them for doing it. Women like to be mastered, but they hate not to have their sacrifices appreciated. On the other hand, men don't really appreciate women who are nice to them all the time. When I am married, I shall be a devil most of the time, but every now and then, when my husband least expects it, I shall show him what a perfect angel I can be. Harry laughed outright. What a cat and dog life you will lead. Lovers always fight, I assured him, because they don't understand each other. And by the time they do understand each other, they aren't in love anymore. Does the reverse hold true? Are people who fight each other always lovers? I don't know, I said, momentarily confused. He turned away to the fireplace. Like some more soup? He asked in a casual tone. Yes, please. I'm so hungry that I could eat a hippopotamus. That's good. He busied himself with the fire. I watched. When I can get off the couch, I'll cook for you, I promised. I don't suppose you know anything about cooking. I can warm up things out of tins as well as you can, I retorted, pointing to a row of tins on the mantelpiece. Tache, he said, and laughed. His whole face changed when he laughed. It became boyish, happy, a different personality. I enjoyed my soup. As I ate it, I reminded him that he had not, after all, tendered me his advice. Ah, yes, what I was going to say was this. If I were you, I would stay quietly Pardu here until you are quite strong again. Your enemies will believe you dead. They will hardly be surprised at not finding the body. It would have been dashed to pieces on the rocks and carried down with the torrent. I shivered. Once you are completely restored to health, you can journey quietly on to Beira and get a boat to take you back to England. That would be very tame, I objected scornfully. There speaks a foolish schoolgirl. I'm not a foolish schoolgirl, I cried indignantly. I'm a woman. He looked at me with an expression I could not fathom as I sat up flushed and excited. God help me, so you are, he muttered, and went abruptly out. My recovery was rapid. The two injuries I had sustained were a knock on the head and a badly wrenched arm. The latter was the most serious and, to begin with, my rescuer had believed it to be actually broken. A careful examination, however, convinced him that it was not so, and although it was very painful, I was recovering the use of it quite quickly. It was a strange time. We were cut off from the world, alone together as Adam and Eve might have been, but with what a difference. Old Batani hovered about, counting no more than a dog might have done. I insisted on doing the cooking, or as much of it as I could manage with one arm. Harry was out a good part of the time, but we spent long hours together lying out in the shade of the palms, talking and quarreling, discussing everything under high heaven, quarreling and making it up again. We bickered a good deal, But there grew up between us a real and lasting comradeship such as I could never have believed possible. That, and something else. The time was drawing near, I knew it, when I should be well enough to leave, and I realized it with a heavy heart. Was he going to let me go? Without a word? Without a sign? He had fits of silence, long moody intervals, moments when he would spring up and tramp off by himself. One evening the crisis came. We had finished our simple meal and were sitting in the doorway of the hut. The sun was sinking. Hairpins were necessities of life with which Harry had not been able to provide me, and my hair, straight and black, hung to my knees. I sat, my chin on my hands, lost in meditation. I felt rather than saw Harry looking at me. You look like a witch, Anne, he said at last, and there was something in his voice that had never been there before. He reached out his hand and just touched my hair. I shivered. Suddenly he sprang up with an oath. You must leave here tomorrow, do you hear? He cried. I can't bear any more. I'm only a man after all. You must go, and you must. You're not a fool. You know yourself that this can't go on. I suppose not, I said slowly. But it's been happy, hasn't it? Happy. It's been hell. As bad as that. What do you torment me for? Why are you mocking at me? Why do you say that, laughing into your hair? I wasn't laughing. And I'm not mocking. If you want me to go, I'll go. But if you want me to stay, I'll stay. Not that, he cried vehemently. Not that. Don't tempt me, Anne. Do you realize what I am? A criminal twice over. A man hunted down. They know me here as Harry Parker. They think I've been away on a trek up country, but any day they may put two and two together, and then the blow will fall. You're so young, Anne, and so beautiful, with the kind of beauty that sends men mad. All the world's before you, love, life, everything. Mine's behind me, scorched, spoiled, with a taste of bitter ashes. If you don't want me, you know I want you. You know that I'd give my soul to pick you up in my arms and keep you here, hidden away from the world, forever and ever. And you're tempting me, Anne. You, with your long witch's hair, and your eyes that are golden and brown and green and never stop laughing even when your mouth is grave. But I'll save you from yourself and from me. You shall go tonight. You shall go to Bera. I'm not going to Bera, I interrupted. You are. You shall go to Bera if I have to take you there myself and throw you onto the boat. What do you think I'm made of? Do you think I'll wake up night after night, fearing they've got you? One can't go on counting on miracles happening. You must go back to England and marry and be happy. With a steady man who will give me a good home. Better that than utter disaster. Few. His face grew grim and set. I've got my work ready to hand. Don't ask what it is. You can guess, I dare say. But I'll tell you this, I'll clear my name or die in the attempt, and I'll choke the life out of the damned scoundrel who did his best to murder you the other night. We must be fair, I said. He didn't actually push me over. He'd no need to. His plan was cleverer than that. I went up to the path afterwards. Everything looked all right, but by the marks on the ground I saw that the stones which outlined the path had been taken up and put down again in a slightly different place. There are tall bushes growing just over the edge. He'd balanced the outside stones on them, so that you'd think you were still on the path when in reality you were stepping into nothingness. God help him if I lay my hands upon him. He paused a minute and then said in a totally different tone, "We've never spoken of these things, and have we? But the time's come. I want you to hear the whole story from the beginning. If it hurts you to go over the past, don't tell me," I said in a low voice. "But I want you to know. I never thought I should speak of that part of my life to anyone. Funny, isn't it, the tricks fate plays?" He was silent for a minute or two. The sun had set, and the velvety darkness of the African night was enveloping us like a mantle. "Some of it I know," I said gently. "What do you know?" "I know that your real name is Harry Lucas." Still he hesitated, not looking at me, but staring straight out in front of him. I had no clue as to what was passing in his mind, but at last he jerked his head forward as though acquiescing in some unspoken decision of his own and began his story. Chapter XXVI. You are right. My real name is Harry Lucas. My father was a retired soldier who came out to farm in Rhodesia. He died when I was in my second year at Cambridge. Were you fond of him? I asked suddenly. I don't know. Then he flushed and went on with sudden vehemence. Why do I say that? I did love my father. We said bitter things to each other the last time I saw him, and we had many rows over my wildness and my depths, but I cared for the old man. I know how much now, when it's too late, he continued more quietly. It was at Cambridge that I met the other fellow. Young Yeardsley. Yes, young Yeardsley. His father, as you know, was one of South Africa's most prominent men. We drifted together at once, my friend and I. We had a love of South Africa in common, and we both had a taste for the untrodden places of the world. After he left Cambridge, Yeardsley had a final quarrel with his father. The old man had paid his debts twice, he refused to do so again. There was a bitter scene between them. Sir Lawrence declared himself at the end of his patience, he would do no more for his son. He must stand on his own legs for a while. The result was, as you know, that those two young men went off to South America together, prospecting for diamonds. I'm not going into that now, but we had a wonderful time out there. Hardships in plenty, you understand, but it was a good life, a hand-to-mouth scramble for existence far from the beaten track, and, my God, that's the place to know a friend. There was a bond forged between us two out there that only death could have broken. Well, as Colonel Reyes told you, our efforts were crowned with success. We found a second Kimberley in the heart of the British Guiana jungles. I can't tell you our relation. It wasn't so much the actual value in money of the find. You see, Yeardsley was used to money, and he knew that when his father died he would be a millionaire, and Lucas had always been poor and was used to it. No, it was the sheer delight of discovery. He paused, and then added, almost apologetically, You don't mind my telling it this way, do you? As though I wasn't in it at all. It seems like that now when I look back and see those two boys. I almost forget that one of them was Harry Rayburn. Tell it any way you like, I said, and he went on. We came to Kimberley, very cock-a-hoop over our find. We brought a magnificent selection of diamonds with us to submit to the experts. And then, in the hotel at Kimberley, we met her. I stiffened a little, and the hand that rested on the doorpost clenched itself involuntarily. Anita Grunberg, that was her name. She was an actress. Quite young and very beautiful. She was South African born, but her mother was a Hungarian, I believe. There was some sort of mystery about her, and that, of course, heightened her attraction for two boys home from the wilds. She must have had an easy task. We both fell for her right away, and we both took it hard. It was the first shadow that had ever come between us, but even then it didn't weaken our friendship. Each of us, I honestly believe, was willing to stand aside for the other to go in and win. But that wasn't her game. Sometimes, afterwards, I wondered why it hadn't been, for Sir Lawrence Yeardsley's only son was quite a part one. But the truth of it was that she was married to a sorter in De Beers, though nobody knew of it. She pretended enormous interests in our discovery, and we told her all about it and even showed her the diamonds. Delilah, that's what she should have been called, and she played her part well. The De Beers robbery was discovered, and like a thunderclap, the police came down upon us. They seized our diamonds. We only laughed at first, the whole thing was so absurd. And then the diamonds were produced in court, and without question they were the stones stolen from De Beers. Anita Grunberg had disappeared. She had effected the substitution neatly enough, and our story that these were not the stones originally in our possession was laughed to scorn. Sir Lawrence Yeardsley had enormous influence. He succeeded in getting the case dismissed, but it left two young men ruined and disgraced to face the world with the stigma of thief attached to their names, and it pretty well broke the old fellow's heart. He had one bitter interview with his son in which he heaped upon him every reproach imaginable. He had done what he could to save the family name, but from that day on his son was his son no longer. He cast him off utterly. And the boy, like the proud young fool that he was, remained silent, disdaining to protest his innocence in the face of his father's disbelief. He came out furious from the interview. His friend was waiting for him. A week later, war was declared. The two friends enlisted together. You know what happened. The best pal a man ever had was killed, partly through his own mad recklessness in rushing into unnecessary danger. He died with his name tarnished. I swear to you, Anne, that it was mainly on his account that I was so bitter against that woman. It had gone deeper with him than with me. I had been madly in love with her for the moment. I even think that I frightened her sometimes, but with him it was a quieter and deeper feeling. She had been the very center of his universe, and her betrayal of him tore up the very roots of life. The blow stunned him and left him paralyzed. Harry paused. After a minute or two, he went on. As you know, I was reported missing, presumed killed. I never troubled to correct the mistake. I took the name of Parker and came to this island, which I knew of old. At the beginning of the war, I had had ambitious hopes of proving my innocence, but now all that spirit seemed dead. All I felt was, what's the good? My pal was dead, neither he nor I had any living relations who would care. I was supposed to be dead too, let it remain at that. I led a peaceful existence here, neither happy nor unhappy, numbed of all feeling. I see now, though I did not realize it at the time, that that was partly the effect of the war. And then one day something occurred to wake me right up again. I was taking a party of people in my boat on a trip up the river, and I was standing at the landing stage, helping them in, when one of the men uttered a startled exclamation. It focused my attention on him. He was a small, thin man with a beard, and he was staring at me for all he was worth as though I was a ghost. So powerful was his emotion that it awakened my curiosity. I made inquiries about him at the hotel and learned that his name was Carton, that he came from Kimberley, and that he was a diamond sorter employed by De Beers. In a minute, all the old sense of wrong surged over me again. I left the island and went to Kimberley. I could find out little more about him, however. In the end, I decided that I must force an interview. I took my revolver with me. In the brief glimpse I had had of him, I had realized that he was a physical coward. No sooner were we face to face than I recognized that he was afraid of me. I soon forced him to tell me all he knew. He had engineered part of the robbery, and Anita Grunberg was his wife. He had once caught sight of both of us when we were dining with her at the hotel, and, having read that I was killed, my appearance in the flesh at the falls had startled him badly. He and Anita had married quite young, but she had soon drifted away from him. She had gotten with a bad lot, he told me, and it was then for the first time that I heard of the Colonel. Carton himself had never been mixed up in anything except this one affair, so he solemnly assured me, and I was inclined to believe him. He was emphatically not of the stuff of which successful criminals are made. I still had the feeling that he was keeping back something. As a test, I threatened to shoot him there and then, declaring that I cared very little what became of me now. In a frenzy of terror, he poured out a further story. It seems that Anita Grunberg did not quite trust the Colonel. Whilst pretending to hand over to him the stones she had taken from the hotel, she kept back some in her own possession. Carton advised her, with his technical knowledge, which to keep. If, at any time, these stones were produced, they were of such color and quality as to be readily identifiable, and the experts at De Beers would admit at once that these stones had never passed through their hands. In this way, my story of a substitution would be supported, my name would be cleared, and suspicion would be diverted to the proper quarter. I gathered that, contrary to his usual practice, the Colonel himself had been concerned in this affair, therefore Anita felt satisfied that she had a real hold over him, should she need it. Carton now proposed that I should make a bargain with Anita Grunberg, or Nadina, as she now called herself. For a sufficient sum of money, he thought that she would be willing to give up the diamonds and betray her former employer. He would cable to her immediately. I was still suspicious of Carton. He was a man whom it was easy enough to frighten, but who, in his fright, would tell so many lies that to sift the truth out from them would be no easy job. I went back to the hotel and waited. By the following evening, I judged that he would have received the reply to his cable. I called round at his house and was told that Mr. Carton was away, but would be returning on the morrow. Instantly, I became suspicious. In the nick of time, I found out that he was in reality sailing for England on the Kilmorden Castle, which left Cape Town in 2 days' time. I had just time to journey down and catch the same boat. I had no intention of alarming Carton by revealing my presence on board. I had done a good deal of acting in my time at Cambridge, and it was comparatively easy for me to transform myself into a grave bearded gentleman of middle age. I avoided Carton carefully on board the boat, keeping to my own cabin as far as possible under the pretense of illness. I had no difficulty in trailing him when we got to London. He went straight to an hotel and did not go out until the following day. He left the hotel shortly before 1 o'clock. I was behind him. He went straight to a house agent in Knightsbridge. There he asked for particulars of houses to let on the river. I was at the next table also inquiring about houses. Then suddenly in walked Anita Grunberg, Nadina, whatever you like to call her. Superb, insolent, and almost as beautiful as ever. God! How I hated her! There she was, the woman who had ruined my life, and who had also ruined a better life than mine. At that minute I could have put my hands round her neck and squeezed the life out of her inch by inch. Just for a minute or two I saw red. I hardly took in what the agent was saying. It was her voice that I heard next, high and clear, with an exaggerated foreign accent, the Mill House, Marlow. The property of Sir Eustace Pedler. That sounds as though it might suit me. At any rate, I will go and see it. The man wrote her an order, and she walked out again in her regal, insolent manner. Not by word or a sign had she recognized Carton, yet I was sure that their meeting there was a preconceived plan. Then I started to jump to conclusions. Not knowing that Sir Eustace was at Cannes, I thought that this house hunting business was a mere pretext for meeting him in the mill house. I knew that he had been in South Africa at the time of the robbery, and never having seen him, I immediately leaped to the conclusion that he himself was the mysterious colonel of whom I had heard so much. I followed my two suspects along Knightsbridge. Nadina went into the Hyde Park Hotel. I quickened my pace and went in also. She walked straight into the restaurant, and I decided that I would not risk her recognizing me at the moment, but would continue to follow Carton. I was in great hopes that he was going to get the diamonds, and that by suddenly appearing and making myself known to him when he least expected it, I might startle the truth out of him. I followed him down into the tube station at Hyde Park Corner. He was standing by himself at the end of the platform. There was some girl standing near, but no one else. I decided that I would accost him then and there. You know what happened? In the sudden shock of seeing a man whom he imagined far away in South Africa, he lost his head and stepped back upon the line. He was always a coward. Under the pretext of being a doctor, I managed to search his pockets. There was a wallet with some notes in it and one or two unimportant letters. There was a roll of films, which I must have dropped somewhere later, and there was a piece of paper with an appointment made on it for the 22nd on the Kilmorden Castle. In my haste to get away before anyone detained me, I dropped that also, but fortunately I remembered the figures. I hurried to the nearest cloakroom and hastily removed my makeup. I did not want to be laid by the heels for picking a dead man's pocket. Then I retraced my steps to the Hyde Park Hotel. Nadina was still having lunch. I needn't describe in detail how I followed her down to Marlow. She went into the house, and I spoke to the woman at the lodge, pretending that I was with her. Then I, too, went in. He stopped. There was a tense silence. You will believe me, Anne, won't you? I swear before God that what I am going to say is true. I went into the house after her with something very like murder in my heart, and she was dead. I found her in that first-floor room, God. It was horrible. Dead, and I was not more than 3 minutes behind her. And there was no sign of anyone else in the house. Of course, I realized at once the terrible position I was in. By one master stroke, the blackmailed had rid himself of the blackmailer, and at the same time had provided a victim to whom the crime would be ascribed. The hand of the colonel was very plain. For the second time, I was to be his victim. Fool that I had been to walk into the trap so easily. I hardly know what I did next. I managed to go out of the place looking fairly normal, but I knew that it could not be long before the crime was discovered and a description of my appearance telegraphed all over the country. I lay low for some days, not daring to make a move. In the end, chance came to my aid. I overheard a conversation between two middle-aged gentlemen in the street, one of whom proved to be Sir Eustace Pedler. I at once conceived the idea of attaching myself to him as his secretary. The fragment of conversation I had overheard gave me my clue. I was now no longer so sure that Sir Eustace Pedler was the colonel. His house might have been appointed as a rendezvous by accident, or for some obscure motive that I had not fathomed. Do you know, I interrupted, that Guy Paget was in Marlow at the date of the murder? That settles it then. I thought he was at Cannes with Sir Eustace. He was supposed to be in Florence, but he certainly never went there. I'm pretty certain he was really in Marlow, but of course I can't prove it. And to think I never suspected Paget for a minute until the night he tried to throw you overboard. The man's a marvelous actor. Yes, isn't he? That explains why the mill house was chosen. Paget could probably get in and out of it unobserved. Of course, he made no objection to my accompanying Sir Eustace across in the boat. He didn't want me laid by the heels immediately. You see, evidently Nadina didn't bring the jewels with her to the rendezvous as they had counted on her doing. I fancy that Carton really had them and concealed them somewhere on the Kilmorden castle. That's where he came in. They hoped that I might have some clue as to where they were hidden. As long as the colonel did not recover the diamonds, he was still in danger, hence his anxiety to get them at all costs. Where the devil Carton hid them, if he did hide them, I don't know. That's another story, I quoted. My story. And I'm going to tell it you now. Chapter XXVII. Harry listened attentively whilst I recounted all the events that I have narrated in these pages. The thing that bewildered and astonished him most was to find that all along the diamonds had been in my possession, or rather in Suzanne's. That was a fact he had never suspected. Of course, after hearing his story, I realized the point of Carton's little arrangement, or rather Nadina's, since I had no doubt that it was her brain which had conceived the plan. No surprise tactics executed against her or her husband could result in the seizure of the diamonds. The secret was locked in her own brain, and the colonel was not likely to guess that they had been entrusted to the keeping of an ocean steward. Harry's vindication from the old charge of theft seemed assured. It was the other, graver charge that paralyzed all our activities. For, as things stood, he could not come out in the open to prove his case. The one thing we came back to, again and again, was the identity of the colonel. Was he, or was he not, Guy Paget? I should say he was, but for one thing, said Harry. It seems pretty much of a certainty that it was Paget who murdered Anita Grunberg at Marlow, and that certainly lends color to the supposition that he is actually the colonel, since Anita's business was not of the nature to be discussed with a subordinate. No, the only thing that militates against that theory is the attempt to put you out of the way on the night of your arrival here. You saw Paget left behind at Cape Town. By no possible means could he have arrived here before the following Wednesday. He is unlikely to have any emissaries in this part of the world, and all his plans were laid to deal with you in Cape Town. He might, of course, have cabled instructions to some lieutenant of his in Johannesburg, who could have joined the Rhodesian train at Mafeking, but his instructions would have had to be particularly definite to allow of that note being written. We sat silent for a moment, then Harry went on slowly. You say that Mrs. Blair was asleep when you left the hotel and that you heard Sir Eustace dictating to Miss Pettigrew? Where was Colonel Race? I could not find him anywhere. Had he any reason to believe that you and I might be friendly with each other? He might have had, I answered thoughtfully, remembering our conversation on the way back from the Matopos. He's a very powerful personality, I continued, but not at all my idea of the colonel. And, anyway, such an idea would be absurd. He's in the Secret Service. How do we know that he is? It's the easiest thing in the world to throw out a hint of that kind. No one contradicts it, and the rumor spreads until everyone believes it as gospel truth. It provides an excuse for all sorts of doubtful doings. Anne, do you like Race? I do, and I don't. He repels me and at the same time fascinates me, but I know one thing, I'm always a little afraid of him. He was in South Africa, you know, at the time of the Kimberley robbery, said Harry slowly. But it was he who told Suzanne all about the colonel and how he had been in Paris trying to get on his track. Camouflage of a particularly clever kind. But where does Paget come in? Is he in Race's pay? Perhaps, said Harry slowly, he doesn't come in at all. What? Think back, Anne. Did you ever hear Paget's own account of that night on the Kilmorden? Yes, through Sir Eustace. I repeated it. Harry listened closely. He saw a man coming from the direction of Sir Eustace's cabin and followed him up on deck. Is that what he says? Now, who had the cabin opposite to Sir Eustace? Colonel Race. Supposing Colonel Race crept up on deck and, foiled in his attack on you, fled round the deck and met Paget just coming through the saloon door. He knocks him down and springs inside, closing the door. We dash round and find Paget lying there. How's that? You forget that he declares positively it was you who knocked him down. Well, suppose that just as he regains consciousness he sees me disappearing in the distance? Wouldn't he take it for granted that I was his assailant? Especially as he thought all along it was I he was following. It's possible, yes, I said slowly. But it alters all our ideas. And there are other things. Most of them are open to explanation. The man who followed you in Cape Town spoke to Paget, and Paget looked at his watch. The man might have merely asked him the time. It was just a coincidence, you mean? Not exactly. There's a method in all this, connecting Paget with the affair. Why was the mill house chosen for the murder? Was it because Paget had been in Kimberley when the diamonds were stolen? Would he have been made the scapegoat if I had not appeared so providentially upon the scene? Then you think he may be entirely innocent? It looks like it, but if so, we've got to find out what he was doing in Marlow. If he's got a reasonable explanation of that, we're on the right tack. He got up. It's past midnight. Turn in, Anne, and get some sleep. Just before dawn, I'll take you over in the boat. You must catch the train at Livingstone. I've got a friend there who will keep you hidden away until the train starts. You go to Bulawayo and catch the Beira train there. I can find out from my friend in Livingstone what's going on at the hotel and where your friends are now. Beira, I said meditatively. Yes, Anne, it's Beira for you. This is man's work. Leave it to me. We had had a momentary respite from emotion whilst we talked the situation out, but it was on us again now. We did not even look at each other. Very well, I said, and passed into the hut. I lay down on the skin-covered couch, but I didn't sleep, and outside I could hear Harry Rayburn pacing up and down through the long dark hours. At last he called me. Come, Anne, it's time to go. I got up and came out obediently. It was still quite dark, but I knew that dawn was not far off. We'll take the canoe, not the motorboat, Harry began, when suddenly he stopped dead and held up his hand. Hosh! What's that? I listened, but could hear nothing. His ears were sharper than mine, however, the ears of a man who has lived long in the wilderness. Presently I heard it too, the faint splash of paddles in the water coming from the direction of the right bank of the river and rapidly approaching our little landing stage. We strained our eyes in the darkness and could make out a dark blur on the surface of the water. It was a boat. Then there was a momentary spurt of flame. Someone had struck a match. By its light I recognized one figure, the red-bearded Dutchman of the villa at Musenberg. The others were natives. Quick, back to the hut. Harry swept me back with him. He took down a couple of rifles and a revolver from the wall. Can you load a rifle? I never have. Show me how. I grasped his instructions well enough. We closed the door and Harry stood by the window which overlooked the landing stage. The boat was just about to run alongside it. Who's that? Called out Harry in a ringing voice. Any doubt we might have had as to our visitor's intentions was swiftly resolved. A hail of bullets splattered round us. Fortunately, neither of us was hit. Harry raised the rifle. It spat murderously, and again and again. I heard two groans and a splash. That's given M something to think about, he muttered grimly as he reached for the second rifle. Stand well back, and, for God's sake. And load quickly. More bullets. One just grazed Harry's cheek. They're going, had enough of it. They're a good mark out there on the water, and they can't see how many of us there are. They're routed for the moment, but they'll come back. We'll have to get ready for them. He flung down the rifle and turned to me. Anne, you beauty. You wonder. You little queen. As brave as a lion. Black-haired witch. He caught me in his arms. He kissed my hair, my eyes, my mouth. And now to business, he said, suddenly releasing me. Get out those tins of paraffin. I did as I was told. He was busy inside the hut. Presently, I saw him on the roof of the hut, crawling along with something in his arms. He rejoined me in a minute or two. Go down to the boat. We'll have to carry it across the island to the other side. He picked up the paraffin as I disappeared. They're coming back, I called softly. I had seen the blur moving out from the opposite shore. He ran down to me. You. But dying together's not much fun. We'll do better than that. See, they've got two boatloads this time. Going to land at two different points. Now for my little scenic effect. Almost as he spoke, a long flame shot up from the hut. Its light illuminated two crouching figures huddled together on the roof. My old clothes, stuffed with rags, but they won't tumble to it for some time. Come, Anne, we've got to try desperate means. Hand in hand, we raced across the island. Only a narrow channel of water divided it from the shore on that side. We've got to swim for it. Can you swim at all, Anne? Not that it matters. I can get you across. It's the wrong side for a boat, too many rocks, but the right side for swimming, and the right side for Livingstone. I can swim a little farther than that. What's the danger? You little goose. Sharks live in the sea. But you're sharp, Anne. Croaks, that's the trouble. Crocodiles? Yes, don't think of them, or say your prayers, whichever you feel inclined. We plunged in. My prayers must have been efficacious, for we stone. It's rough going, I'm afraid, and wet clothes won't make it any better. But it's got to be done. Walk was a nightmare. My wet skirts flapped round my legs, and my stockings were soon torn off by the thorns. Finally, I stopped, utterly exhausted. Harry came back to me. Hold up, honey. I'll carry you for a bit. He gave us food to eat and hot coffee and got our clothes dried for us whilst we rolled ourselves in Manchester blankets of gaudy hue. In the tiny back room of the hut, we were safe from observation whilst he departed to make judicious inquiries as to what had become of Sir Eustace's party and whether any of them were still at the hotel. It was then that I informed Harry that nothing would induce me to go to Beira. I never meant to, anyway, but now all reason for such proceedings had vanished. The point of the plan had been that my enemies believed me dead. Now that they knew I wasn't dead, my going to Beira would do no good whatever. They could easily follow me there and murder me quietly. I should have no one to protect me. It was finally arranged that I should join Suzanne, wherever she was, and devote all my energies to taking care of myself. On no account was I to seek adventures or endeavor to checkmate the colonel. I was to remain quietly with her and await instructions from Harry. There, there's one thing, I said thoughtfully, we ought to have a code of some kind. That's easy enough. Any message that comes genuinely from me will have the word and crossed out in it. Without trademark, none genuine, I murmured. What about wires? Any wires from me will be signed Andy. Train will be in before long, Harry, said Ned, putting his head in and withdrawing it immediately. I stood up. And shall I marry a nice steady man if I find one? I asked demurely. Harry came close to me. My God! Anne, if you ever marry anyone else but me, I'll wring his neck. And as for you? Yes, I said, pleasurably excited. Husband I have chosen, I said satirically. And doesn't he change his mind overnight?